For years, the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone has been one of the most misunderstood places on Earth. A place where abandoned cities stand frozen in time, where nature reclaimed concrete and steel, and where radiation became the invisible force people believed had warped everything it touched. But in recent years, something strange began circulating online. Photographs of dogs roaming the ruins, their fur tinted an unnatural shade of blue. Almost overnight, the images spread across social media, accompanied by a familiar claim. The dogs were mutating. The idea was too compelling to ignore. Animals living in one of the most radioactive places on Earth, slowly evolving, their bodies changing in response to decades of exposure. To many, it felt like proof that Chernobyl was still alive, still altering nature in ways we couldn't control or understand. But as with many stories tied to the disaster, the truth turned out to be far more complicated and far more unsettling than the viral explanation suggested. The dogs of Chernobyl are not strays in the usual sense. They are the descendants of pets left behind when the area was evacuated in 1986. When families were forced to leave, many had no choice but to abandon their animals. Over time, those animals bred, adapted, and formed semi-feral populations that still live in and around the ruined reactor site today. Some live near the plant itself. Others wander through the ghost towns nearby. A few have learned to rely on the occasional presence of humans for food and shelter. For years, these animals went largely unnoticed by the outside world. That changed when researchers and humanitarian groups began documenting their lives, studying how prolonged low-level radiation might affect mammals over time. One of those organizations, the Clean Futures Fund, began regularly entering the exclusion zone to provide veterinary care, vaccinations, and population control for the dogs. Their work offered a rare glimpse into a population that had lived for generations in one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Then the photos appeared. Dogs with fur stained a pale, unnatural blue. Not patches, not marks. Entire coats tinged with color. The images spread rapidly, and the conclusions followed just as fast. Radiation had changed them. The dogs were mutating. Evolution was happening in real time. But that story, as dramatic as it sounded, wasn't true. What actually happened was far less cinematic, and far more revealing about how easily myths take hold when Chernobyl is involved. When the photos began circulating, accusations followed almost immediately. Some claimed the animals had been deliberately dyed for attention. Others accused researchers of using AI to manipulate images. A few insisted the dogs were proof of radiation-induced mutation and that authorities were trying to hide it. In reality, none of those explanations were correct. The dogs had not been altered by radiation. They hadn't evolved blue fur, and no one had painted them. What had happened was something far more ordinary and far more accidental. The dogs had come into contact with a chemical substance, likely a disinfectant or industrial cleaning agent, commonly used in the exclusion zone. Some of these substances are blue in color, and when animals roll in them, the pigment can cling to fur for days. And these dogs, like most dogs, had done exactly that. They had rolled in something they shouldn't have. The reason it appeared so dramatic was because of where it happened. Chernobyl. In a place already surrounded by fear and mystery, even the smallest anomaly becomes magnified. The blue fur became proof of mutation not because the science supported it, but because the setting made it feel believable. But the deeper truth is that radiation does not work the way most people think it does. There is a widespread belief that radiation instantly causes visible mutations. Glowing eyes, distorted bodies, strange colors. But that idea comes more from fiction than biology. In reality, low-level radiation rarely causes immediate, visible changes. When it does cause harm, it does so quietly, at the cellular level, often over long periods of time. Cancer, genetic damage, reproductive issues, these are slow processes, not sudden transformations. Even in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, radiation levels vary dramatically depending on location. Some areas are highly contaminated, others are no more radioactive than naturally occurring regions elsewhere in the world. In fact, there are places on Earth with naturally higher background radiation than parts of Chernobyl, including areas of Brazil where people have lived for generations without obvious genetic consequences. This is why the idea of blue dogs evolving due to radiation doesn't hold up under scrutiny. That doesn't mean the animals of Chernobyl are unaffected by their environment. Far from it. Studies have shown that the dogs in the zone form distinct populations, isolated from one another, with limited genetic diversity. Many suffer from inbreeding. Food is scarce. Winters are brutal. Predators roam freely. Disease spreads easily. Life expectancy is short. These are the forces shaping the dogs of Chernobyl. Not glowing mutations, not radiation immunity, and not sudden evolutionary leaps. Yet the myth persists. Part of that is because the story is easier to tell. A mutated animal fits neatly into the larger narrative people associate with nuclear disaster. It reinforces the idea that Chernobyl is a place where nature went wrong, where the rules no longer apply. But the reality is more sobering. The dogs are not monsters or miracles. They are survivors of abandonment, adapting as best they can to an environment shaped by human error. Their struggles come not from radiation, but from hunger, exposure, disease, and isolation. Many die young. Some live longer thanks only to the intervention of volunteers who return again and again to provide care. In fact, one of the most important findings to come out of years of research is not that these dogs are evolving, but that they are not. There is no evidence of radiation resistance, no proof of cancer immunity, no sign of dramatic genetic divergence. And that truth carries an uncomfortable implication. If radiation at Chernobyl is not producing monsters, not mutating animals beyond recognition, then the real danger of the disaster was never about creating something new. It was about destroying what already existed. The damage wasn't visible. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't glow in the dark. It happened slowly, quietly, and over decades. Which is why the story of the blue dogs became so powerful. Not because it revealed some secret mutation, but because it reminded the world how eager we are to believe that Chernobyl is still changing things in obvious ways, when in reality its legacy is far more subtle, far more human, and far harder to confront. The dogs didn't turn blue because of radiation. They turned blue because they were animals surviving in a forgotten place, wandering through the remains of a disaster that never truly ended. And in many ways, that truth is more haunting than any mutation could ever be.